As everyone knows, the American Rescue Plan Act was passed by Congress and signed into law by the president last spring. And then after that, there were huge deposits of money that went out to counties directly all across the country. And we started getting the questions almost immediately. What can we do with this? You know, what are the eligible uses? I've tried to make as many county board meetings as I can to kind of go through, well, what it all means. And oh, by the way, what I said back in June is probably not entirely accurate today. The final rule that the U.S. Treasury Department has been going through over time has really evolved a significant amount in the last several months. And so anyway, what we wanted to go through with you is that we finally got the final rule from the U.S. Treasury Department. There are some very interesting things in the final rule for all of us, which kind of changed a little bit of our original thoughts as to what eligible uses were and what sorts of things you might be able to spend your ARPA dollars on. And so anyway, just wanted to introduce all of you and welcome you to this webinar. By far, the expert on ARPA is not me. You guys have gotten short shrift when I've gone out to county board meetings. However, the young lady to my immediate left, Candace Meredith, is she's certainly the expert as far as what you can do and things that you need to be aware of from an accounting standpoint. So anyway, I will beg out and I'll stop talking. I'll let the experts talk. But again, wanted to welcome all of you. This is, for what it's worth, a very, very big deal. We'll reiterate this a little bit later. This is something where that direct transfer of funds from the U.S. Treasury to counties all across the country is unprecedented. You know, we always hear and we always talk about, we send a lot of money out to Washington, we don't get anything back in return. This is one of those instances where that happened. And frankly, one of the main reasons it happened is because the National Association of Counties really worked hand in glove with Congress, the Biden administration, and you know, a number of other stakeholders, including the U.S. Treasury, to make sure that we had the flexibility, we had that direct access to these monies, and they certainly, and we will send the slides out. Yes, Carrie, we certainly do appreciate their efforts in doing that. And I've said it before, but I will say it again. If your county is not a member of the National Association of Counties, and I believe that there are 16 counties that are not, it's something you really, really should consider. For most counties, it's about $450 are your annual dues, and the amount of money that you all receive from ARPA funds would pay for thousands of years of National Association dues. And they certainly did a great job on all of our behalves. The other thing I do want to stress, I've heard from a number of folks that, well, because ARPA was signed during the Biden administration, that these are Biden dollars or Biden bucks. I've heard that one a few times. And all I've got to say is money does not wear a jersey. It doesn't wear red. It doesn't wear blue. It pretty much just wears green. You know, this was a bipartisan bill that was passed by Congress. So you have Republicans and Democrats that were voting for it. And yes, the president that happened to sign it into law is a Democrat. But I really don't think that this is anything that should be overtly political. This is something that, you know, what we saw in the last couple of years was unprecedented, how the economy and how a lot of basic services essentially shut down. And so this is an infusion of dollars, which is helping all of us recover. And whether or not it had been President Trump or it was President Biden, this law was going to pass in pretty much the same form that it has now. So, you know, I certainly hope that any misgivings that you have about the politics of it are thus taken care of. But this is a big win for county government. It's a big win for Nebraska County government. And so if you have any questions, obviously we are certainly here to answer them. And with that said, I will now finally turn it over to our actual expert, and that would be Ms. Candace Meredith. So take it away, Candace, and thank you very much.
Thank you, John. And I'm by no means an expert, but I will definitely help walk you through some of the highlights of the final rule. And yes, we will send these slides out. And then I also send a link to a wonderful 40-page document that the United States Treasury put out, and it's a really great piece that really did a lot of, I guess, copy and paste into this PowerPoint from this 40-page document. So we'll get that link sent to you as well. Tess, did you want to come over? And Tess is going to monitor our chat. So if you have any questions along the way, please just put them in the chat for us.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Cast change.
All right. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so there is obviously way more to the eligible uses and to the final rule. The final rule is over 400 pages, but I'm going to highlight some of the eligible uses today that from questions that we've received at the NACO office. If you have something that you want to talk about that's not on these slides, please contact Elaine, Beth, or I to review. But these are, again, just basic point of views that we've questions that we've taken at the NACO office here. So the big point is the final rule isn't effective until April 1st of this year, but counties can take advantage of these new provisions prior to the effective date of April 1st. So that means if you are, if you have one of these new eligible uses, you can start expending now. So, but it is effective April 1st. The areas that we're going to cover today, as far as allowable uses, are support public health response, the revenue public sector revenue loss, the water and sewer infrastructure. We'll address the negative economic impacts. We'll just do that a little bit. The premium pay for essential workers has been a very common topic, and the broadband infrastructure. So the biggest key feature that I think impacts Nebraska counties is the fact that the U.S. Treasury has now allowed a $10 million revenue loss allowance in the replacement of lost revenue category. As many of you on this webinar, I think, have a lot of clerks and treasurers. When you filed your interim report, you had to do that crazy calculation, determine if you had a revenue loss. And most of the counties did not or had very little. Now that's pretty much out the window. You don't need to worry about that. If you have under $10 million that you've received in these funds, and that's the first and second tranche put together, which is 89 of our Nebraska counties, you can use this, the county can use this $10 million allowance now. And why we are going to specify this a lot is this is basically where you can do, there's a lot of eligible uses under the general government. So we're going to really hit hard on this one because this is where the most flexibility in how you can use your use these funds. So basically it says the counties may allocate up to $10 million of the recovery fund allocation to spend on government services. Counties you can still calculate the actual revenue loss. So if anybody's still interested in doing that, you're more than welcome to do so. They did change some provisions on how you calculate that revenue loss, which I'll cover just in a minute. It simplifies reporting requirements for counties using the standard $2 million standard allowance. At the end here, I'll talk a little bit about that compliance reporting. Most of you on here will have an annual reporting that's due April 30th. So if you don't want to use the $10 million allowance, here is just a quick overview of what the changes are if you want to calculate the revenue loss. The revenue loss growth rate changed from 4.1 to 5.2 as a new standard default. I believe there'll be new calculators from the GFOA that will be out to reflect those, so you don't have to hand calculate those. Counties may choose to calculate the revenue loss on a fiscal year or calendar year basis. I know that was a huge complication for Nebraska counties, as we don't do calendar year. We really focus on fiscal year. And counties must adjust actual revenue totals for the effective tax cuts increases adopted after January 6, 2022. NACO's recommendation for those 89 counties is not to worry about this calculation. Just focus on that $10 million allowance. So as I mentioned before, this is the replacing lost revenue category. Basically is you can expend any general government service up to the revenue loss amount with the standard allowance of $10 million. This category gives our counties the most flexibility in how you spend these funds. So if this is a service that's traditionally provided by the county, then it is eligible. So some examples would be constructions of schools and hospitals. If you have some sort of arrangement with them, this is a huge one. Road building and maintenance and other infrastructure. So now, the building of roads is now an acceptable expense. Health services, general government administration, staff and administrative facilities, environmental remediation, police, fire responders, and other public safety services. And I know a lot of folks, that we're talking about ambulances and things like that. So that is now all would be included as an eligible expense. We put this slide in because there was a couple new provisions in the new features of what is not eligible. So what's not eligible is extraordinary contribution to a pension fund, which was in the interim final rule, as well as debt service payments or rainy day or reserve accounts or settlement agreements or judgments. So those are still all in place in the final rule. But what's new they added was activity that conflicts with the purpose of the ARPA statute and conflicts with the COVID-19 mitigation practices. Also, they added violations of award terms and conditions or conflict of interest requirements under the uniform guidance. So those were two new pieces as far as not eligible uses, or if you're in violation, determined in violation of using an expense, and you would have to repay those funds. So here is some information about the compliance reporting. The counties have two options. So when you report in April, there's going to be the category where you can there'll be like a button or something that says, hey, if you just want to use your $10 million allowance, which we're going to highly recommend that you do. Or your other option is, if we have the other 4 counties on, you can do your $10 million allowance, but you can also do your calculation over that $10 million there. So again, recommending just do your $10 million. I wanted to throw this piece in because this was a very common question about the replacing lost revenue category for the non-federal match and cost share. Funds available under the revenue loss eligible use category may be used to meet the non-federal cost share or matching requirements of other federal programs. However, these funds may not be used for non-federal share states for Medicaid. Recovery funds beyond those under the revenue loss category cannot be used as the non-federal match or cost share requirement or other federal programs. So if you're looking at services and wanting to match up with other things, you need to make sure that you get some clarity on that. The other piece is if you're thinking of possibly doing improvements at a jail, for instance, and it's over the amount that you received. So say you only received $1 million. You cannot get a $1 million bond on top of it. You cannot get money, you cannot get a loan and that together. So just keep that in mind as well. You'll have to make sure you're very vigilant about how you do that. Not saying you can't make improvements to a jail. However, you can't tie the eligible uses with a bond. Is there any questions so far on replacing lost revenue? I move premium pay to the second topic because this is another one that comes in quite often. So for premium pay, Under the interim final rule, counties were able to submit a written justification to treasurers to Treasury to ensure workers are not listed could receive premium pay. Now the final rule permits counties to award premium pay to workers that are not exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act overtime provisions without submitting a written justification. And then it clarifies that premium pay may be provided in installments or lump sums. We heard that quite a bit too. Yes, it does allow for monthly or quarterly, so they're not taking a huge hit on their taxes for like a one-time payment. Premium pay can be awarded to hourly, part-time, or salaried or non-hourly workers. Volunteers cannot receive premium pay. If you're interested in paying volunteers for services, there is a different channel that you can take. And if you'd like to visit with me about that, I have some information. We discussed this with another county already. So if that's something that you're interested in, I can give you further direction on that since that's been studied. But volunteers right now cannot receive premium pay under the premium pay category. So the final rule outlines 3 steps for determining premium pay eligibility. Any work performed by an employee. So it's basically now, you don't have to decide if a 911 person is eligible or not. Basically, it's all county employees, as long as they are regular in-person interactions and regular physical handling of items. And workers would not be engaged in essential work if telework performed from a residence. So again, the final rule says if they were teleworking, they're not eligible. And if they're regularly in person, have in-person interactions or handling things. So it opens up it clarifies who is eligible and who is not now as far as county employees. It confirms that premium pay responds to workers performing essential work during the public health emergency. Determine average annual wage for county employees. Any employee normally eligible for overtime. If worker does not meet any of the above, county must submit written justification with allowances. Any questions on premium pay? I know quite a few counties have already started that process. This one just kind of opens the door to possibly more clarification on more employees within the county that are qualified now. Okay, water and sewer projects. We are excited to announce that culvert repair is now an eligible use. That was a huge question that came across. The resizing, removal, and replacement of storm sewers and additional types of stormwater infrastructure. I know some counties are going to work with their cities and villages to update their storm sewers. So that's another possibility. Infrastructure to improve access to safe drinking water. Dam and reservoir rehabilitations, another new allowable expense. And there's some remediation projects as well. We've had quite a few counties that are interested in broadband. They loosen the rules on that a little bit as far as what the Mbps's can be now for download and upload speeds. And I also want to mention that, if you're interested in broadband, please follow along with the state. The state is looking at investing quite a bit of money in rural broadband. So there is opportunity for collaboration with the state as well. So if you're interested in broadband eligible use, you can visit with Elaine Beth or I, and we can get you with the right people at the state to help navigate that. So there can be a cost share there. Is this culvert repair replacement on any given rural road, or does it have to promote safe drinking water and clean water? Our understanding is that was a part of the interim rule. I can verify, I'll make sure to get Elaine and Beth involved, but my understanding is the culvert repair widened now that we don't have to have that drinking water and clean water issue anymore. But I will definitely, when we send these slides out, I will make sure to have a confirmed answer for you. But my understanding is no, that's not the case anymore with the final rule. Good question. The key new features in the final rule for public health and negative economic impacts. I'm going to highlight just a few of them. Again, questions that we've received at the home office here. It was aid to impacted industries, the public sector capacity, and capital expenditures. I'm going to focus on the word impacted. The final rule states that industry can be designated as impacted if the industry is in the travel, tourism, or hospitality sectors. If the industry is outside of travel, tourism, hospitality sectors, the industry is impacted if the industry experienced at least 8% employment loss for pre-pandemic levels, or the industry is experiencing comparable or worse economic impacts in that field. Counties have flexibility to define industries now, and aid can be provided to business and attractions that were operating prior to the pandemic and affected by required closures. So they had to have been in existence prior to the pandemic. If you're interested in doing that grant type eligible use, Elaine has a grant form on the NACO website under the ARPA button that I highly recommend that you look at and have your county attorney look at as an option, because it's very detailed, and you'll have to be accountable if you want to send those monies to those impacted industries. There's a level of accountability and administrative work that the county will have to do to make sure that those funds are being spent accurately. The small business component here, the Treasury has now defined the small business by having no more than 500 employees and is independently owned and operated and is not dominant in its field of operation. So again, a small business is defined as decreased, if they are impacted, they had decreased revenue or gross receipts during the pandemic. They had financial insecurity, increased cost, capacity to weather financial hardship, challenges covering payroll, rent, mortgage, etc. Again, if you do a grant to a small business in your community, I would use that sheet, that form that Elaine has in the website under the ARPA button to help you identify these areas. The final rule also identified what nonprofit is. So the nonprofit is a 501c3 or a 501c19. I know I've had some questions on if churches could qualify for a grant through the county. So they would have to be defined as one of these tax exempt organizations. And they also, the impact to the nonprofit is a decreased revenue, a financial insecurity, increased cost, capacity to weather the financial hardship, and challenges covering payroll, rent, or mortgage. So the county would have to determine that in order to make sure that that they qualify for these funds. Eligible uses do include loans or grants to mitigate financial hardship. I would recommend grant, not a loan, and technical or in-kind assistance or other services that mitigate negative economic impact to the pandemic. So from the public health response, some of the key features that came out for very specific eligible uses under the public health response is vaccination testing programs, monitoring, contact tracing and public health surveillance, public health data systems, COVID-19 prevention, support for isolation and quarantine, transportation to reach the vaccination or testing sites. I know that was one area that we've had questions on, and support for prevention, mitigation, or other services to congregate living facilities, and emergency operation centers and emergency response equipment, emergency response radio systems. That's another huge one that we've heard time and time again. If this is where you would fit the all those 911 radio systems, this is where the expense would go under the public health response category.
You have a question in the chat.
Would a nonprofit have to be open? Yes, the nonprofit had to be open prior to the pandemic, and they have to meet all those qualifications to qualify for an eligible for you to submit the grant to them. That's a great question. Yes. And where's the chat?
On the left.
Oh. So as long as it's under $10 million, we can do road repair. Yes. Replace a failing bridge. Yes. And with a new culvert. Yes. Replacing fading 911 road intersection signs and I lost my spot. Oh, I got two going on here. Okay. Replacing fading 911 road intersection signs and install sewer and water infrastructure in new industrial development. Yes, 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 and yes. Yes, that again, we're highly recommending that you all use that replacement loss category, because you now have a $10 million allowance, and that's all under what counties currently do for services. The biggest thing is we're going to mention, you're going to hear me say it all year long, is document, document, document. Just for clarification, since we receive less than $10 million, we are allowed to use the funds for any government services, correct? Yes. Would we still have to identify what category the expense falls under, or would we just document lost revenue? I would say if it falls under your government services, what you're currently doing as a government services that you're offering, you can put it under that category, that replacement loss category. Yes. If it falls into something different, bathroom and flooring of our county road, and yes, that would go under general services. I've heard also a lot about ADA compliance with elevators in the courthouses. Before we would, when the interim final rule was out, we would say, no, we didn't think that would qualify. Now with the general services opening up, yes. But please be mindful, as you get into these general services projects, you cannot take out a loan attached to that. So you can't do a bond on it. You have to make sure you keep that separate. What about tornado warning sirens at the county or local level? Yes, and I think that question's come up quite a bit. And yes, that would be considered a government service. And I think that's also would awesome be covered under what we're looking at now, public health response too. There's yes, yep. And one word right here, you cannot combine ARPA funds with debt. Can you? Yes, that's absolutely right. So you cannot, in my example of, so you're going to spend $1 million on you're going to spend, you have a $2 million worth of expenses to update your jail and make it safe for the inmates by doing the separation or putting in new air filtration. You have a $2 million expense, but you only have $1 million. You have to you cannot take a $1 million out in debt, can't do a bond on that. You have to keep that separate. Now, I'm not saying you can't do this, it's just that your expenses have to be explicit. So you cannot attach the debt to the ARPA funds. So you have to be very mindful in how you document that. Does that make sense? I'm not saying you can't be creative in this, where you allot, your full amount of your ARPA funds to do this project 1, and then over here you have project 2 at the jail.
And you have a couple more in the chat on the left.
This is why you're here. I'm gonna let,
Okay, so Misty,
okay, what about a tornado shelter for a government building? Oh, that's it. That's a good one. Can, let me, I don't know why that wouldn't be. Because it kind of goes with the government services and providing for administrative component there. That's a good one. Heating and cooling for the courthouse as ours is outdated. Yep, that's again, that goes under your government uses.
that's it for now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this was I was just at Nationals this last month at a knowledge forum, and Matt Chase had brought up some of these things, and he just, again, he just reiterated, you know, if you guys use that, just highly recommends using that $10 million allowance, doing your general government services. And just as long as you're not building golf courses, you know, things that are outside of what you're supposed to do or provide for your county government. And as long as you document. Okay, Tim says, we have a federal FEMA hazard mitigation property acquisition project going on. Can the county's 25% match of the project be covered?
No.
That one I'm gonna have to verify. I think somebody from NEMA was actually going to be giving a presentation on that, or because I know they're getting ready to do an ARPA presentation as well. But I can have Tess take that down and we can confirm that. I don't know about that, but we'll get back to you. Yes, enhancing outdoor recreation like hiking, biking trails. That was a very common one. And actually it was a part of the interim rule because of the heavy use of our recreational areas, because a lot of people did stay in Nebraska type things, that a lot of those places took a toll because of the heavy use. So there is a provision in there to help with that as well, Carrie. Yep, putting in security glass and updating counters at our courts. Yep. Yep, if it didn't get in the CARES, then definitely you can get that in here now. Those are under general services. Okay, recovery funds may be used for expenses to households, medical providers, or other incurred medical costs to the pandemic. So unreimbursed expenses for medical care for COVID-19 testing or treatment, paid family and medical leave for public employees, emergency medical responses, and treatment of long-term symptoms or effects of COVID. So there is a component in here now where they have explained, you know, if you had a huge impact for your employees for medical expenses, there is a provision as well for that. And behavioral health care, the final rule also allows a wide, very broad range of activities for the general public. So if you want to invest in any sort of behavioral health mechanisms in your community, there's a whole list. They've broadened that behavioral health piece as well. So to restore the public sector capacity, I know we didn't have a lot of counties that didn't go into a reduction in staff or furloughed, but I did add this because there was a few counties that we did have questions about this. So I'm not going to go into great detail about it, but there was some changes in the final rule regarding restoring public sector capacity, and I put it on the slide for you guys. And they did, oops, getting a little carried away here. They did define what public safety staff is, public health staff, and human service staff. And again, this is just a little bit more information about the changes that they made in the final rule regarding restoring public sector capacity. And the deadlines from the timelines for that. And this also goes on to about the effective service delivery. Again, bringing people back. One of the ones I wanted to point out, which we've heard quite a bit, is the backlogs caused by shutdowns, and hiring folks to get yourself caught back up again on the court backlogs. So there is an administrative component to this restoring public sector capacity to get you guys back up to full speed. So there is that component. Also, under this piece, there's the technology infrastructure piece on it, where you can also do your upgrades to your video conferencing software, data, and case management systems. So to again, another huge, just like putting in the windows, here is about the video conferencing piece. Okay, so capital expenditures under the public health component here. This is, a little bit complicated. So under the public health and negative economic impact, if you're going to do large expenditure projects, some examples of approved expenditure projects under the public health and negative economic impacts are schools, childcare facilities, medical facilities, emergency operation centers, behavioral health centers, affordable housing, primary care clinics, improvements to vacant and abandoned properties. Examples of ineligible that we cannot do: you cannot build a new jail, you cannot build new facility, congregate facilities, you cannot build a new golf course or a new convention center. Those are not acceptable expenses. So those are off the table, but definitely childcare facilities has been a very common question that we've had. They do have specific rules as far as if you're going to do these large expenditures. So when you're looking at a capital expenditure of a larger capacity, when you get to greater than $1 million, there needs to be a written justification on that outside of the compliance reporting. If anybody has a large expenditure that they're looking at over $1 million, just if you don't mind, just maybe giving Elaine, Beth, or I a shout so we can help you get further clarification on those larger expenditures. Am I missing anything?
So we can use $10 million for a lot of services, but you said we don't have to do the new calculation.
Yep.
How would we justify that section for the report?
Yep. So for the loss replacement, they are now allowing a $10 million, because 89 counties did not come up with a $10 million, didn't come up with a huge loss revenue. So now what they're doing is they're giving you a $10 million allowance. So when you do your compliance reporting, you're just there's going to be I want to say like a pop-up that says, do you want to use your $10 million allowance under your replacement loss category? And you're going to say yes, or you're going to click on something, is the way I'm understanding it. And then how would you justify using that section for that report? So that is, that report is the most broadest and flexible because it's general government services. So how you justify that is the expense a general government service? And if you can answer that and you can provide the proper documentation of why that's a general government service of the county, then yes. If you start getting into doing grants or you're doing other types of things, then you might want to use, or doing voluntary pay to voluntary employees, or then you might want to, you're going to use a different category. But what we're saying is, I think from what we're understanding and what we're seeing in these comments, a lot of what people are asking or counties are looking for is going to go under general government services. Repairs to the county buildings, things like that. Does that make sense, Sarah?
We have another one in the chat too.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Where's the chat?
Down on the right.
Oh.
if our total expenditure is under $1 million, then we just have to do our compliance reporting, no extra justification or explanation.
Yeah, oh, here we go. I'm gonna go to that next slide right now. So basically the cost of capital expenditure is less than 1 million. There's no written justification required. Cost of expenditure project is greater than or equal to 1 million, but less than 10 million. Written justification required, but does not need to be submitted as part of reporting. So there's a different, it looks a little bit different when it's between $1 and $10 million. There's a written justification piece that if you have that, let us know, because there wasn't further explanation. So if anybody's going to be spending $1 to $10 million, let us know so we can work with nationals to make sure that we are getting the best practice and what that written justification looks like. Okay. Because it just says written justification, but for someone like me, I want to know what does that look like? And so if one county is going to do this, I would love to know about it so we can get you more information so it gets done properly. And then of course, here I have this, the cost of capital expenditure project is $10 million or more. Written justification is required and must submit as part of regular reporting. That 1 million on a capital expenditure. So if you're going to spend $1 million on a project like putting in a childcare center, then you would need written justification on that. But if you're going to spend $200,000 on premium pay, that's separate. It's just on a capital expenditure. So it's just on a one-time, this is how much it's going to cost me. Is where these written justifications come in. So I think they're just trying to put some controls on large expenditures. But if you have multiple different types of smaller things going on, like if a siren cost, I don't even know what the siren, or if 911 equipment costs $200,000, it doesn't need a written justification. But if you're going to have a big expenditure, then yes. Does that make sense? Yes, thank you. Okay, great.
If your county did not experience revenue loss, can you still use the 10 million for general services?
Yes. That's a $10 million allowance, no matter if you lost money or not. It's to every county. That's why we're highly recommending you use it, because that's the most flexible. So the compliance reporting deadline. So for just a few of our counties, they will be doing quarterly reports. Those are counties with population that exceeded 250,000, or they had more than $10 million in funding. So for the majority of our counties, we're going to do annual reporting. Those are counties with population below 250,000 residents that were allocated less than 10 million. That compliance report, so if you're trying to go, if you're one of those 80 smaller counties, your deadline is going to be April 30th. The time you covered will be March 3rd, 2021 through March 31, 2022. And every year going forward, I think until 2026 or something like that, your deadline is always going to be April 30th. Is grant funding to other entities for water issues? Do we pay the funds to the entity or the vendor completing the project? I think that's about, you know, what your internal controls are going to look like. And I can, you might want to talk with Elaine Menzel. She's really great with with that type of granting funds and the best practices for that. Because at the end of the day, you have to make sure that you're justifying that those funds are going to the right place.
Then you have one of the Q&A. Thank you.
If you use the 10 million for general services, do employees that receive premium pay still need to be eligible workers performing essential work, or now can the county use the money as they wish? I don't want to say you can use the money as you wish. You still have to be very mindful of how you do that. If you're going to do premium pay, I would highly recommend that you use the premium pay component. They did broaden that. And the premium pay is for internal, your county employees, and it's for external employees. So I don't know, I'm not sure who this is, but if you want to give me a call or email me, we can kind of talk through what that would look like. I just want to caution, I just don't want to, we want to make sure that we're documenting it accordingly. I don't know if that would be a red flag or not. Or if you're going to be doing these, if you're going to be paying employees, we want to make sure that it's incorporated into your general services if you're going to use that replacement loss category. So. Decoding the language of the guidance. So some of the keywords, I don't know if anybody's gotten into the final rule, but some of the nationals has broke this down. If you see the word should and must, that means it's mandatory reporting, use, and compliance. If you see the words may and encourage, it allows some counties some discretion, even as a federal preference. And proportional and reasonable are key terms in determining the level of investment for eligible activities. So when you're looking through the final rule, those are just kind of key words to look for when you're determining these eligible uses. I quickly want to go over the recommendations from NACO. Again, with the general government services now open, we're going to highly recommend that you do not buy down the levy, because if you buy down the levy this year, these are one-time funds. So if you get yourself into a situation where you buy down the levy, you might not ever be able to get yourself back up to providing those level of service that you had, in your 2, 3, 4, 5 going forward because of caps. So please stay clear of that so you don't get the future of the county in jeopardy of not being able to support your services. Another recommendation that we've had is engage with the community. Since these are one-time investments in your county, see what the community is thinking, what's out there. We've heard the sirens, the 911 services, the childcare facilities, a lot of different, I'm sure you've had people knocking at your door, but just engage and get some ideas of what they're looking for when you're deciding how to spend these funds. Collaborate with the cities, the villages, schools. The schools did receive some funds for what they're, for broadband, to prevent any duplication of services. See what they have going on out there so there's no duplication. Invest in the modernization of cybersecurity infrastructure in the courthouse. That's another eligible use now. We all know how important network security is. This might be the time to look at modernizing your cybersecurity infrastructure as part of your courthouse, making it uniform. If you're interested in rural broadband, the state is as well. As I mentioned, if that's something that you guys are looking at getting access to everybody, the state is putting together a plan, see what partnerships you can develop there, how much money they're going to invest in your community. When it comes to time to spend these funds, document. I'm guessing, we'll be talking more about this throughout the year and having some conversations about how to document internal controls. We'll be working with you on that. And again, as John mentioned, if you're not a member of NACO Nationals, let me know. I can help you learn more about that. They have advocated for counties across the United States, and I'm excited that they were able to do this direct funding and we didn't have to go through the state to do this, that you guys now have a lot of control over what you want to do with those funds because you know what's best for your counties. Yes, they now can be under that public health component, that those emergency radios and all that. Yep. In Suanne, yeah, that's something that we would have said no in the interim rule, but now that they've loosened that up. So the second half of the funds is supposed to be not more than 12 months since you received the first tranche. So I haven't heard when they're going to open the, I guess, the floodgate, so to speak. But it's not supposed to be more than 12 months since you received the first set. Again, here's some just additional resources. Shannon, I am guessing we're going to have to go through the same process, unfortunately. You might have to get back in that portal again, but since you already have it set up, it shouldn't be as bad as it was the first time. And here's again, additional resources for all these different types of things available to you. You can just click on the link when we send the slides out. And of course, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to Beth and Elaine or I. Beth and Elaine are, working the Capitol right now a little bit more than I am. So Beth and Elaine might take a little bit more to get back to you. When we're out at district meetings, we will be visiting more about ARPA as we find out more information and get some clarity on some of these, questions. Yes, as soon as I get more information from nationals, I'm still kind of waiting on that written justification thing. We do have when are those funds going to be available? Yeah, so as soon as we get that information from nationals, I definitely will make sure we get that forwarded to you. But just to go back, I just really want to reiterate that this $10 million, it's not I want to say it's not a free for all. So you just got to make sure that it's the general government services that you can use these for. So just keep that in mind. General government administration, staff, and administrative facilities. So that is putting in that elevator, that is putting up those windows, that is putting, making improvements to your courthouse. Okay.
Oh, you scroll down
Scroll down.
on the question answer.
Oh, yeah.
That one we did.
Oh, how many people on the call today? I think
There were 75.
there was up to 75, and we also have this recorded. So because we know we had a few people that weren't able to attend, so we will upload this to the.
It'll be on our YouTube channel. It'll be on our YouTube channel, but I will also link the YouTube video onto the homepage of the NACO website.
Okay. All right. Is there any more questions before I wanted to make sure we were done by 10 o'clock? If we have already done heating and cooling and windows, can we submit billing and get paid back? When did it? It's Janet. It depends on when you did this. So, Janet, do you want to just maybe send me an email? Within the last 2 years or so. Yeah, probably not. If it was just in the last, since the final rule, possibly, but that's no. Can you share the slides? Yes. Tess will share the slides. We'll have it also on the website.
I would say it should be up on the website by the end of today. So when you go onto the NACO website, on the left side, there's that section that says latest news. And I will have the YouTube link to the presentation and the slides, and I'll also put up the link to the overview of the final rule that was sent out by the Treasury. So that'll all be there under that latest news.
I know this is a lot to digest, so if you have questions, please reach out. And I know there's very specific things that you would like to talk about. So yeah, just email Beth, Elaine, or I, and we'll help navigate those conversations. And also, as a reminder, we do have LUTs as a partner, and they can help with compliance reporting and documentation as well. And I know many of you have agreements with them. Okay, well, if there's no more questions on the chat, then I will go ahead and sign off, and I thank you. Again, I know we went through a lot of information there, so I appreciate your time. You guys take care and have a great day.